So my name's Lee Ferned. I'm one of the directors at Lincoln Property. We entered the UK market in 2016-17, and one of the sites that we purchased was in Reading with our JV partner MGT. Just a little bit of background about Lincoln. Lincoln's probably one of the largest developers in the world. It's a Pan-American sort of operation. We've done a lot of business across Central and Eastern Europe in the 90s and through to the present day. UK was a market that we wanted to come into, but it was political at that time why we didn't. However, when we purchased the site in Reading, one of the things that we always bring along to our developments is our green credentials in development. And then with our partners, the likes of Callison, Genslers, and obviously Hawley, we've got an amazing sort of like consultancy team that are driving that aspirations to deliver a world-class product that's considering all sustainable sort of like aspects. Thanks, Bob.
So Hawley, for those of you that don't know us, we're an engineering consultancy with a strong focus on sustainability. We're a key member of the UK Green Building Council and have recently been involved in writing a number of sort of reports around net zero carbon and looking at setting. You mentioned Stationhill, the project, just to give you a really sort of very simple overview. The part where my cursor here is known as phase 1. And the part at the top of the screen is known as phase 2. It's very much intended to be kind of a new gateway to Reading. There are, as I say, it's a phased development. We're looking to create around 1,200 build-to-rent homes, around 600,000 square feet of office, and 100,000 square feet of retail. And it really is about creating a sense of place and a real destination for everyone to come to. One other thing to mention is that there has been several previous iterations of the scheme for many, many years. And obviously the first part of making this a sustainable development is making sure it gets built and delivered going forward. So a little bit of background. I could have used anyone for this slide, ranging from some famous activist to a Mayfair agent. You know, we're getting clients now coming to us saying that they can't let their office in Mayfair unless they've got a net zero story. So I think there's never been a time in my life in this industry where there's been such a focus on zero carbon and climate change and that sort of agenda. So I think it's a really exciting time if you're... The other thing I wanted to say is that the world is becoming more electric. There's this thing called the decarbonisation of the electricity grid, and it does mean that electricity has become greener and greener as it's generated from more and more renewable sources, and that's an important... In terms of regulations, we know that there's a new Part L, which is energy and efficiency in buildings, due out this year. It was due out sooner, but I think there's been a few matters on government hands that have probably delayed the process slightly in that front. And it's looking at it's a stepping stone to the next sort of carbon as we go forward. Then in 2025, something called the Future Home Standard, where we're looking to effectively really moved on another step towards the zero carbon in 2030, and then the kind of all zero carbon including existing stock in 2050. The key things to note around the future homes is that we'll ban gas from new homes from 2020, and some of the U values and things in terms of thermal performance mean that triple glazing will become a standard. And as you can see, what it means in this little graph on the right is things like CHP and gas boilers that we've used for years as source of heating and energy have really become very inefficient going forward, and gas has become very inefficient compared to electricity.
It's finishing 8
o'clock. And then now one of the key things is that we're trying to set a definition for what we call net zero, and zero for operational energy is net zero in construction, so it's whole life carbon, so it's the material used to build a building alongside all the energy that's used in running a building. And we've recently been involved in a big case study looking at both the residential and office UK Green Building Council, and looking at the cost of on a large development and how that works going forward. And as you can see, with all these steps, the one thing to take away, as I said before, is that gas boilers and CHP will really be no more, particularly in residential schemes as shown here. and there's a real push towards electric technology such as heat pumps, direct electric, and the use of extensive PVs to generate electricity on sites. So in terms of Stationhill, how did we approach the project? So on phase one, we adopted a slightly innovative solution in that we went all electric to try and do something different for the building. Now this is quite challenging in a way, because you would say that electric heating is not, necessarily an energy efficient method, but actually using the correct carbon factors for electricity, it worked out being almost 50% better than building regulation position. What we also had, bearing in mind this was, I think, 550 residential units, was no impact on air quality. We saved 16,000 metres of pipework, 200 millimetres of floor build-up, and around 550 square metres of built space, alongside saving water, improving overheating performance. And as part of the commitment, we made a commitment to use green energy, so that any carbon that was used in the development, the remaining, say, 50%, would be offset because we were using only electricity from renewable sources. The slight challenge with this, when we came to the planning piece, bearing in mind that this was a while ago, just try and jump to the planning policy at the time was in flux, and so we're still being asked for CHP. There was no recognition of the change in carbon factors, and actually we're being asked to use the carbon factor for electricity in 2013, so it didn't work in terms of our calculations. There was no, something I'll come to at the end in terms of planning policy, there was no overheating testing required. We think that's one of the biggest complaints in new residential dwellings, and something we would champion on every scheme, and not just simple overheating, but proper dynamic modelling. And there's a strong preference for heat pump network. And it was before, one of our challenges was trying to demonstrate what we'd saved with all the materials. And now perhaps with the new net zero approach, where what they call embodied carbon, all the energy you use to create the components of the building, you're able to calculate. It was difficult for us to demonstrate the savings we were making through the, if you like, the reduction in pipe work, the reduction in floor build-up, everything on the floors, without having that methodology in place, or a recognised methodology that's now in place. But the planners did secure the green energy commitment as part of an ongoing commitment for the development, so that we would always effectively be zero carbon, because all of our electricity was coming from 100% renewable sources. And the wording was quite clear in the section 106 that we couldn't step outside of that, and it wasn't just a green energy provider, it was 100% renewable, which was a great thing for the scheme. So phase 2 and 3, I should explain that phase 2 was a detailed planning, it's a large office building, and phase 3 was the remainder of the site, which is another office building and around another 600 residential units and retail space. Again, in terms of our approach, we made a commitment to achieve zero carbon for all of the residential space, with a minimum of 35% reduction on site. We looked at a heat pump network for the office that could export heat to the residential when it was developed, bearing in mind the phasing of the programme, and the potential to connect to a future heat pump network outside the site if needed. In terms of the office building, we both went for the BREEAM Excellent, which is a planning condition, and a WELL Platinum rating, as one of the key things we see now, both in offices and residential accommodation, is a focus on sort of health and well-being. So trying to quantify that and demonstrate that we've achieved that was good. And one of the challenges actually we had on the scheme was trying to optimise the facade, because there was a strong push for the large office building in phase 2 to be a real showcase building for Reading. But we actually wanted to remove some of the glass to improve the cooling performance and reduce the energy demand, but wanted to do that in a way that the building still looked like a showcase building. So there were some challenges. And again, we had the commitment to green energy throughout, so that we were always importing electricity from renewable sources. And given that we were only using electricity for energy, that meant we always had 100% renewable provision. In terms of the planning, by the time we've submitted for phases 2 and 3, the policy has been updated, and there's a strong direction towards ground source heat pumps. And I think Daniel mentioned the energy. And so that commitment in terms of the heat pump network has been secured and future connections. There's still no recognition of carbon factors in terms of the changing for electricity. And there are no carbon targets for the commercial or the work planning policy, but a 35% reduction for domestic. And as I mentioned, there was the need for the connections to a wider network. So if I was to sum up how can planning help with climate change, which I think was where we started this presentation. I think one of the things that would be great is if there was consistency across planning departments with, you know, really challenging minimum targets and then stretch targets. It seems to me slightly, you know, not wrong, but slightly odd that if we were 30 minutes away on the train, we would apply the carbon factor, the lower carbon factors for electricity for a London scheme, but in Reading we couldn't apply them as part of the planning policy, and therefore we need to make sure there's a consistent framework. I think we know through our work in setting a sort of framework to achieve net zero that there will be an increased resource requirement for planners to properly look at this and analyse the information coming through. When clients are doing whole life carbon assessments and looking at embodied energy, this is quite a complex topic, and it takes more than one energy officer across all the schemes to look at things properly. So we think that's a big thing for planning going forward. We think every planning department should set robust overheating standards and as a minimum make TM59 modelling a condition for residential schemes. That's something that the GLA do to demonstrate that you control overheating through passive means. And perhaps if we were going to really push it, planning departments might start to look at incentivising prefabrication and off-site manufacture to reduce waste and improve the quality of the buildings we build, and also in a more plug-and-play way, there may be opportunities to do things quicker and get things delivered quicker. And another thing that we're seeing is massive advances in battery technology, and given that everything is going all electric, I think it would be a great thing to incentivise energy storage on site so that energy is not wasted. And if we have PVs, they can charge up batteries that discharge at times when they're not used. And I'll leave you with a quote that I got from one of our clients I think it was last week, after they made us sign up to their own zero carbon commitment before registering as one of their suppliers, where he said it's better to reach for the sky and fall short than do nothing. That's me done, and I think I'll stop sharing. Thank you very much.